I'm not teaching, I'm publicly learning, but hi and welcome to Learning for the Life in UK test part 84, the rebellion of the clans. That is on the page 34, while doing leg injury prevention training, and if you participate in the leg injury prevention training, that is at your own risk. So in 1745, there was another attempt to put a Stuart king back on the throne in place of George I's son, George II, Charles Edward Stuart, born Prince Charlie, a grandson of Charles II, landed in Scotland. Is there a point? There's a point after the George II. There's a point, okay. So the sentence is, in 1745, there was another attempt to put a Stuart king back on the throne in place of George I's son, George II. So George I had a son. George I was the closest relative to Queen Anne, who had died in 1707, and who had become king. There was protest by the Scottish Jacobites against that, who wanted James on the throne, but that was quickly defeated. Now in 1745, this is either the year that Charles I died, or it is during the reign of, not Charles I, in place of Joseph II. George I. It's either the year of the death of George I and George II would come onto the throne. That is possible. That is the most likely thing that they want to tell us here. But it could be also that George II was reigning for, like Richard, the son of Oliver Cromwell, for some years, and now we decided, no, we don't want it. So Richard reigned for some time. Richard, the son of Oliver Cromwell, and then the people said, we rather want the restoration. When Oliver Cromwell, when he died in 1658, his son Richard became Lord Protector in his place, but was not able to control the army or the government. Although Britain had been a republic for 11 years without Oliver Cromwell, there was no clear leader or system of government. Many people in the country wanted stability. In May 1660, Parliament invited Charles II to come back from exile. We don't know anything more about Richard, but I assume that he did not die, and he was also not executed or something. I think he was still reigning as Lord Protector, but the people were saying, after 11 years of reigning, we want someone else. So we don't know if George II at any time was reigning. Maybe that is written in the other sentence, but we don't know what exactly is marking here 1745. In 1745, there was another attempt to put a Stuart king back on the throne. And to the Stuart thing, that is the thing of the chapter, of the last chapter, the Tudors and Stuarts. But we are not able to connect many to that name. At one time, we heard that it was Henry Tudor, the leader of the House of Tudor, and that they had the rose of. Where was that? That was in the chapter before. But okay, that was when the House of Tudor, the red and white rose of the House of Tudor. I don't think the name Tudor ever fell again since when. With other words, I think the name Tudor did not fall a single time in that chapter, the Tudors and Stuarts, except of the title. The name Stuart fell once as Mary Stuart. In other words, we basically don't know anything about what is now here talked about. Another attempt to put a Stuart king back on the throne. Well, we could think. Now, if Henry was the one of the battle, Henry VII, I think was it. Henry VII, after the Wars of the Roses. Henry VII was a Tudor, Henry Tudor. And now Henry VIII was also a Tudor. And Edward VI, as son of Henry VIII, was also a Tudor. And so the daughter of Henry VIII marries, and then also Elizabeth was a Tudor. And if Elizabeth was a Tudor, After her followed James VI. After Elizabeth followed, let's look at that. It was James VI. Her hair was James VI. We have no idea what James VI was after James VI, and it would be really helpful if it was written somewhere. I think it's somewhere here, but we are going with the book from the beginning to the end. So James VI, we don't know anything about James VI. And when we have someone else, and then Charles I, Charles II, Oliver Cromwell, and so on. I'm right now not thinking about what I started to talk right now. So we don't know much about Tudors and Stuarts. But it was for trying to put a Stuart king back onto the throne instead of George II. After George I was not reigning anymore, and that replacement trial happened in 1745. Charles Edward Stuart. No, here we have an idea. He was probably a Stuart. So Charles Edward Stuart, also called Bonnie Prince Charlie, the grandson of James II. So James II was the son of Mary Stuart. James is a Stuart. James VI was a Stuart. James VI and the first was a Stuart. After James VI, we had Charles I. Charles was a Stuart, the son of James I. Then we have Charles II, also a Stuart. Then we have the time of Oliver Cromwell. That was a republic. Let's take it apart. Then we have Charles II again. After Charles II had come back, we have when the Glorious Revolution. No, when we have James. But what James? King James II. But he was a brother. So let's say he was also a Stuart. James II was also a Stuart. After James II, we had the daughter Mary and William of Orange. Let's say Mary was also a Stuart. Now let's assume Queen Anne was the second daughter of James, when she was also a Stuart. And after Queen Anne, I have no idea where I am on the pages. After Queen Anne, we had George I. He was probably not a Stuart, but he was her closest relative. We know to put the Stuart king back on the throne in place of George I's son, George II. George II is not a Stuart. George I is not a Stuart. Queen Anne was a Stuart. George I not. And so his son, George II. Charles Edward Stuart, the grandson of James II. James II. What James II? What country? The grandson. Landed in Scotland. He had land there. He was supported by clansmen from the Scottish Highlands and raised an army. James II, a grandson of James. No, Charles Edward Stuart, or Bonnie Prince Charlie. Charles Edward Stuart, the grandson of James II, landed in Scotland and was supported by the clansmen from the Scottish Highlands and raised an army. Charles initially had some successes, but was defeated by George II's army at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. Charles escaped back to Europe. What Charles? Charles Edward Stuart. Let's do some leg injury prevention training, and if you participate in it, that is at your own risk, and we will do, because we're so late, do mostly leg injury prevention training. We're breathing in and going up, and breathing out, and breathing in, and out, and again in, and out, and the last round, breathe in, and out, and out, and breathe in, and out. The next exercise, no, just a little bit more warm up. We're bringing one leg up and we're pressing it up and we're pointing forward. Now we're bringing the leg back and try not to go into anterior pelvic tilt. Try to have a neutral position in the lumbar spine. So try to have a straight back. We're stretching here the quads. If you just go back with the back, or make a hole in the back with over. So the leg up, and don't make a hole in the back when there's no stretch, but try to have a straight back. When you will see your leg will come further up, depending on the muscle and so on. But but we're actually stretching the quads. It's not about bringing the knee pointing onto the ground, it's about stretching the quads. And if you just bend back, you will of course get it back. But we want to stretch the quads. And for that, keep a neutral position in the pelvis and not a bow in the lumbar spine. The next exercise, the first exercise, we are placing one hand on the tummy and the other one on the lumbar back. And we're bringing one leg up into a straight, flexed foot. And if the quad muscle cramps, then bring it up and point the foot. So just bring the leg up and bring it higher. And control with the hands but you don't fall back. And bring it higher up. You don't have to overdo it with pressure, but put effort into it. And now bring it up and point the foot. And now with the other leg. Bring the leg up, the leg is straight, foot is flexed. Control with the hands that you don't fall back. And bring the leg higher. And a little longer, and try to bring it higher. And now bring it up and point the foot. And the next exercise. While we're doing that exercise, we can read on what happened. We're having the toes of one leg pointing to the outside, the other leg with the heel onto the ground, and we're lifting that heel off the ground and placing it again onto the ground. So, George I died at some time. And in 1745, his son George II got onto the throne. Now, George I and George II were not stewards, and some people wanted a steward. An attempt by Scottish Jacobites to put James II on the throne instead of George I was defeated, but it was some time by 1715. Now we're having it 30 years later. There was again that James II was supported. Which James was wanted to put James II's son on the throne. Wanted to put James II's son, the grandson of James II. So we wanted to put the son of James II. Now we have the grandson of James II. And we're switching up to the other leg to be put on the throne. And it was again supported by clansmen from the Scottish Highlands, who raised an army, and who were again defeated. Now by George II's army. That happened at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. And when Charles Edward Stuart, or Bonnie Prince Charlie, escaped to Europe. I imagine there's coming a question to it. We will not be able to answer it. In 1745, there was another attempt to put a Stuart king back on the throne in place of George I's son. So 1745, there was an attempt to put James II's grandson onto the throne instead of George II. We will do the last exercise. We don't have time. We will continue in the next part. We're having a good standing leg. The other leg comes into the air with a flexed foot. We're trying to be tall with a standing leg. We're trying not to fall down. And we're going straight down with the upper back. And the leg which goes back is also straight. And we're trying to be tall with a standing leg to bring the pressure onto the biceps femoris. And now we're switching to the other side. We will not do anything more to that. The other leg, a few more. And the last one. And just the closing exercise to breathing in. And out. And again in. And out. And again in. Closing the legs. And out. Now down to know how much time I have left. My clock stopped at one time. Thank you very much. And until next time.